The costumes, the hair. There's only one ABBA. And after decades of going their own way, the Swedish supergroup is back.
Benny Andersson at 78 has lived long enough to watch the story of ABBA transform from a Swedish pop phenomenon into something closer to mythology. And yet the man who wrote the chords underneath Dancing Queen, and the winner takes it all, has spent most of his life just out of the spotlight's direct line, standing at a piano while the world looked somewhere else. He was born in Stockholm in December of 1946, the son of a factory worker. And music arrived in his life not through ambition, but through proximity. His grandmother played the accordion, his father sang in the evenings. And by the time Benny was 6 years old, he had an accordion of his own, working out melodies by ear long before anyone taught him to read music formally. It was a household filled with folk tunes and hymns rather than jazz clubs or concert halls. And that early diet of Swedish dance band music and church harmonies would stay embedded in his writing for the rest of his career, even after synthesizers and orchestras entered the picture. By his teenage years, he was playing accordion at local dances, absorbing the rhythms of a Sweden that still danced to live bands in community halls. And it was there, in his mid-teens, that he was invited to join a group called the Hepstars, a band that would soon become one of the most popular acts in the country. The Hepstars gave Benny his first real education in the machinery of pop music, the touring schedules, the recording sessions, the strange alchemy of turning a melody into a hit record that teenagers would scream over. He wrote several of the group's most successful songs, and by the mid-1960s the Hepstars were filling arenas across Scandinavia, sometimes compared in the Swedish press to the Beatles for the frenzy they inspired. But it was a chance meeting in 1966 that would define the rest of his life. Benny crossed paths with Björn Ulvaeus, a member of a folk pop group called the Hootenanny Singers, at a party, and the two discovered an immediate creative chemistry. They began writing songs together almost as a hobby at first, squeezing in sessions between their respective bands' commitments. And what started as an experiment slowly became a partnership neither of them could walk away from. Their approach split naturally along the lines each man was suited for. Benny built the architecture, the chord progressions and melodic hooks, while Björn shaped the words and the narrative shell around them. It was a division of labor that would eventually produce some of the most recognizable pop songs of the 20th century. But in the beginning, it was just two young men in Stockholm, working out arrangements late into the night. It was through this circle that Benny met Annie Frid Lyngstad, known to the world as Frida, a singer who had built a career on the Swedish talent show and cabaret circuit. Around the same time, Björn had begun a relationship with Agnetha Faltskog, a singer already enjoying solo chart success in Sweden. The four of them started performing together informally, blending voices in ways that surprised even themselves. And by the early 1970s, they had begun recording as a quartet under a name assembled from the first letters of their first names, ABBA. Benny and Frida married in 1978, a relationship that had developed over years of shared studio time and touring, though their personal history together, like Björn and Agnetha's, remains something Benny has discussed only in careful, general terms in public interviews, rather than through detailed confessions. What is documented is that all four members were, at various points in the band's run, navigating the strange experience of having their professional and personal lives fold into one another, touring the world together, recording together, and building families alongside a band that was rapidly becoming one of the best-selling musical acts in history. ABBA's breakthrough came at the Eurovision Song Contest in 1974, where Waterloo won for Sweden and introduced the group to an international audience that had, until then, mostly known them within Scandinavia. What followed was an extraordinary run of commercial success throughout the rest of the decade, with albums like Arrival, the album, and Voulez-Vous producing an unbroken string of hits: SOS, Mamma Mia, Fernando, Dancing Queen, Knowing Me, Knowing You, Take a Chance on Me, Chiquitita, and eventually The Winner Takes It All, a song widely understood to reflect the emotional wreckage of Björn and Agnetha's divorce, which became final in 1979. Benny has spoken about the songwriting partnership he shared with Björn as something almost telepathic by that point. The two of them able to sit down at a piano and guitar and build a song skeleton within hours, even as the personal lives of the band members around them grew more complicated. Benny and Frida's own marriage ended in 1981, a separation that occurred while the band was still actively recording and touring, and the emotional undercurrents of that period are often cited by critics and biographers as part of what gives the group's later albums, particularly 1981's The Visitors, their more somber, adult tone compared to the disco-inflected optimism of earlier records. What set Benny apart from many of his pop contemporaries was his appetite for the studio itself as an instrument. He was an early adopter of multi-track recording technology in Sweden, pushing engineers to layer vocal harmonies and instrumental textures in ways that were unusually dense for commercial pop music at the time. He has described in interviews over the years how he would spend disproportionate amounts of time on small details, a particular chord voicing or the blend of two backing vocals, chasing a specific emotional effect, rather than simply completing a track. This perfectionism, paired with Bjorn's lyrical instincts and the vocal interplay between Agnetha and Frida, is often cited by music historians as the reason ABBA's songs have aged so differently from much of the disco and pop music surrounding them. Underneath the bright production, there is frequently a minor key sadness or bittersweetness that Benny built into the harmonic structure itself, a technique, he has said, he inherited partly from the melancholic undertones common in Swedish folk melody. By 1982, ABBA had effectively stopped working together as the group's members pursued other interests, though the band never formally announced a breakup at the time. It simply became clear over the following years that no new music was coming. Benny and Bjorn wasted little time redirecting their creative partnership. They had already begun exploring musical theater, and in 1980 they debuted Chess, a concept album, and later a full-stage musical written with lyricist Tim Rice, built around a Cold War-era chess championship as a metaphor for geopolitical tension. The project produced the hit single One Night in Bangkok and the ballad I Know Him So Well, which became a chart-topping single in the UK. Chess never achieved the sustained commercial success of ABBA, and its Broadway run in the mid-1980s closed relatively quickly, but it marked an important pivot for Benny, proving he could write within a completely different musical idiom, one rooted in theatrical storytelling rather than 3-minute radio singles. Benny continued to work steadily through the 1990s and 2000s, largely out of the public eye compared to his ABBA years, composing for Swedish theater and film and maintaining his involvement with Mono Music, a record label and production company he helped found. He also became closely associated with traditional Swedish folk music later in his career, forming Benny Andersson's Orchestra in 2001, a group dedicated to dance band and folk material that let him return, in some sense, to the accordion-driven music of his childhood. It was a notable contrast to the arena-scale pop of ABBA, and Benny has described this project as something closer to a personal passion than a commercial venture, a way of staying connected to the musical language he grew up inside. The renewed global interest in ABBA arrived with unexpected force in 1999, when the musical Mamma Mia opened in London, built around a fictional story stitched together using ABBA's back catalog. Benny and Bjorn were closely involved in shaping how their songs were used within the show's narrative, and the musical became an enormous international success, eventually spawning a 2008 film adaptation starring Meryl Streep, and a sequel a decade later. The success of Mamma Mia introduced ABBA's music to generations of listeners who had never experienced the band during its original run, and it re-established Benny and Bjorn as active figures in the music industry rather than relics of a bygone pop era. For decades, all four members of ABBA firmly resisted the idea of a reunion, despite enormous commercial offers reportedly running into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Benny has explained this reluctance in various interviews as rooted in an unwillingness to trade on nostalgia without a genuine creative reason to return, and it was not until technology caught up with an idea the group found interesting that they changed course. In 2018, Benny and Bjorn confirmed they had reunited with Agnetha and Frida to record new material, and in 2021, the group released Voyage, their first new album in 40 years, alongside a groundbreaking concert experience in London featuring digital avatars of the band performing as their younger selves, built using motion capture and performance data gathered from all four members. The Voyage project was widely covered as a significant technical achievement as much as a musical one, and it gave audiences a rare chance to hear how Benny's compositional instincts had evolved, and how much they had stayed the same across 4 decades. Throughout his career, Benny has remained a relatively private figure compared to his bandmates, rarely discussing his personal relationships or inner emotional life in great detail during interviews, preferring instead to talk about process, technique, and the craft of songwriting. He remarried in 1981 to journalist Mona Norclett, and the couple has remained together since, a stability that stands somewhat apart from the more publicly dissected relationships within the band during its original run. Those who have worked alongside him over the years, from fellow ABBA members to theater collaborators, have often described him as meticulous and somewhat reserved in social settings, someone who communicates most fluently through music itself rather than through conversation. Though this characterization comes from outside observation rather than from Benny's own self-description. What has emerged clearly across nearly 6 decades of interviews is a picture of a musician who has treated songwriting less as a means to fame and more as a discipline, almost a form of problem-solving, in which the goal was always to find the version of a melody that felt inevitable rather than clever. Benny has spoken about revisiting songs obsessively during the writing process, discarding drafts that felt technically accomplished but emotionally hollow, searching instead for the specific combination of notes that would make a chorus feel like it had always existed, waiting only to be discovered. It is this instinct, more than any single hit song, that colleagues and critics alike point to as his defining contribution to ABBA sound. The reason songs written more than 50 years ago continue to fill stadiums, wedding receptions, and karaoke bars across the world. Now, well into his 70s, Benny continues to compose, still involved with Benny Andersson's orchestra, still occasionally revisiting the Mamma Mia and Chess catalogs for new productions, and still, according to those who have interviewed him in recent years, approaching music with the same exacting patience that defined his work in the 1970s. He has often reflected that the popularity of ABBA's music was never something he could have predicted or engineered, that the band's success was as much a product of timing and chemistry as of any formula he consciously pursued. What he has been more willing to claim credit for is the care itself, the hours spent adjusting a harmony that almost nobody would consciously notice, the belief that a pop song deserved the same attention to detail as any classical composition. It is a philosophy that took a boy with an accordion in post-war Stockholm, and through decades of quiet, exacting work, helped build some of the most enduring music of the last century.